Hello and welcome. You're watching Leaders Briefing, a monthly insider into the market's expected logical as well as illogical moves. Its creators, economist Raffaella Tenconi
and global strategist Roman Hupati.
Wish you a good day and an inspiring session. How concerned are you about what is going on in China on the stock market? There is some significant movement. If we look at the MSCI index that actually tracks the companies with big exposure to China, global companies, it's down by more than 8%. If we look at foreign investors, they pulled out more than 10 billions in dollar terms out of Chinese market, which is a drop in the sea, but of course it indicates the sentiment, if you will. Is there a threat that not only stock market but economy as such is going to somehow be influenced, global economy as such?
I think China definitely has multiple issues related to the fact that to some extent the easy growth story is behind us. And now it's a more developed economy, it's a more indebted economy, it's an economy with a lot of geopolitical hurdles, and you'll definitely talk to us more about it later on. So it is in the doldrums. For Eurozone investors or for US investors, in my head, this is not a massive, real fundamental problems. The Chinese are responding with stimulus, as they always do, right? It is unfolding at a gradual pace. I don't think that there is any magic wand or solution that they could have pulled out of the weekend. This is definitely a process because the problems are getting bigger. So from the point of view of European economy, it means that probably, yes, the manufacturing sector currently is not particularly strong, but these things are cycles. So in reality, no, it is not a hindrance, in my view. What is significantly more important in this part of the world is the fact that, first of all, we are within a multi-year massive transition where we're doing energy, green, digital, nearshoring, which is very big, increasing defense. All of these things are bad news for China, good news for other parts of the world. They influence the labor market, and that is shaping consumption outlook, the outlook for the economy, as well as asset price valuations.
Let me be a contrarian, if you will, for a second, and I will connect the dots. Two things you mentioned. One is the Chinese fiscal stimulus, and the other, the situation in Europe and in Germany in particular, and a possible impact that actually might be felt on the stock market as well. It is highly likely that China will target with its stimulus or stimuli those growth industries that they perceive as the industries of the future. Among other things, automobile or in particular electromobiles. And if they do so, the car makers that actually focus on electric vehicles, of course, will get an extra competitive advantage. They're already immensely successful in Europe, immensely given how there were no Chinese cars not a long time ago. Now, given that they might have some special advantage, they can go with their prices even lower. Of course, that could and most likely is going to be bad news for the ailing car industry, especially in Germany. I mean, Volkswagen already has problems back in China. They have problems here in Europe too. And this can be yet another drop of, let's say, poison into the system. And of course, there is possible spillover, meaning there are supply chains across Europe. There are countries that are heavily exposed to the German automotive, such as the Czech Republic. And now we're getting to stuff we're going to focus on the third, or in the third part of this leaders briefing. But this is something that actually the market already somehow anticipates, or part of the market, and should it actually start materializing, it can actually translate immediately into what is going on the stock market, at least in Europe. That's my take on the subject matter.
I think you have a point. So let me start by saying that nobody should have any illusion that Germany is going to be the locomotive of the Eurozone anytime soon. German data signals that definitely manufacturing sector has issues. It is outsourcing production left, right, and center. So for German consumption, German growth outlook, this is clearly negative, and it's likely to last at least another couple of years. We see it in pricing intentions. Real estate in particular is the only real weak spot that I see in the Eurozone. And lower pricing power through higher competition clearly complicates their balance sheet. Yes. In terms of the aggregate of the Union, the good thing is that actually the other member states, in different ways, they're not nearly as vulnerable. Some of them are actually outright benefiting from, you know, the Brexit dividend or friendshoring, you know. So the Union is so much bigger than Germany, and this is going to be another wave when it's the periphery that leads the Eurozone. So let me leave you with like two thoughts before we go into geopolitics. The first one is, let's just clarify, why is consumption holding up when everybody expects it to collapse? Okay, so the reasons for that is we have learned quite a few lessons from 2008. We introduced regulation, significant regulation after 2008, and therefore the banking sector has been primarily lending to more affluent families. They have more income, they can withstand higher interest rate for a period. Same thing goes for corporate sector, by the way. Higher cash buffers since 2008 kind of help out. Of course, it also happening at a time when there is all this massive fiscal stimulus, still legacy of COVID, and you know, all of this, and plus the policy urgency to have green digital transition going on, which helped the labor market. So the resilience of consumption is real within a cycle effect. Okay, so I think this is an important strength, but it doesn't negate the fact that interest rates today are very high and they're unsustainably high. So let me just reconnect to the bond market. We think that we may not be completely done with rate hikes, but we definitely are going to get more rate cuts next year than what the market expects. Okay, so 2024, it is going to be actually a lot easier to navigate than this year. The last point that I want to make is how you should think about the business cycle in this context, with all of these shocks, right? I mean, you're talking about the geopolitics and the inflation and so on. So what is the way to think about it? My suggestion is this. In the last 3 decades, we had the China deflation effects. We had financial deepening. Everybody gained lower prices, lower interest rates, and levered up. And so when rates went up, we had the balance sheet consolidation and adjustment in the deflation phase. None of that is repeating, okay? This time, it's actually asset price inflation beyond what you think is the fair value of stuff, okay? Because the geopolitics is difficult, because the technology is difficult, clearly there is a trend of inflation, okay? But because we also all need to live in a society, and if you're better off and I am worse off, we somehow need to find a way to cohabitate. Very likely that politics is going to continue to kind of please and heal the wounds, right? So this makes the business cycle shorter, shallower downturn. In the previous part, we had business cycles that were as long as 14, 15, 17 years. A lot of financial deepening. This is going to get shorter, but you don't get the big recession until things become so extreme that you will go into severe FX volatility and sovereign solvency challenges. So you should now think more about the tail risk over medium term rather than what happens in the next 6 months, because the next 6 months probably is going to be nearly as bad as you think.
Now, one question that actually relates to both themes you just tackled, and that is the omen, if you will, of the US consumer. On one hand, even current statistics, despite all the speculation that the reserves are depleted, show that they are spending. The pace is slowing down, but they are still robustly spending. On the other hand, there's an argument that there are three factors that might actually come in play and somehow merge their forces, if you will, in the fall. First of all, that the sort of a trickle-down effect of high interest rates will actually reach a significant portion of the consumer base. That essentially people are going to feel the pain. And if you look at delinquencies, for instance, vis-a-vis the real estate, if you look at data that show how many people have problems paying for their cars and stuff like that, it seems like, yes, this is happening. We don't know how massive it is, but it is happening. That's number one. Number two, most of the reserves that were actually built up during the pandemic time, the 2 years of COVID, where people were getting paychecks and were limited in their ability to spend, are slowly being depleted. Some say it was already done, that they are gone. Some say it's going to be in the fall. The thing will actually happen in the fall. But long story short, it is probably sometimes around now that we will reach that space. And third, of course, and we discussed this in the previous leaders briefing, if I'm not mistaken, it's the student debt repaying. It's going to happen again in the fall. And these three forces, some people say, can actually, or they might be the reason for the perfect storm. What's your take on the subject matter? Meaning, and we're talking about both a business cycle and then certain irritants that actually make it even shorter. That's one. And a second, of course, consumption and generally the ability of people to actually pull the economy despite all the challenges there are.
Well, two things. First of all, US households in the aggregate are significantly wealthier than what they were years ago. They have ramped up exposure to equities enormously, but in the aggregate, they're significantly wealthier. You cannot underestimate the wealth effect that the stock market gives them. You know, you don't have anything comparable to that in the Eurozone. So you need to plummet the S&P in order to really shock the system, essentially. So this is the first thing. The other thing is, of course, the distribution is highly skewed. You know, when you look at the bank deposits, you know, the top 20% holds the vast majority of cash. And these people are drawing down cash, but it's still, the overall portfolio is very, very significant. So it's not that there isn't going to be strain on the consumer. There will be strain on the consumer. There is. In fact, that's why inflation is coming down. That's why I said the Fed is going to cut. But it's very unlikely that it tips into a protracted recession like we saw it in 2008 because of the wealth effect. And the other thing is, and this is the important thing to keep in mind, these days everybody is alert to inflation and everybody can kind of do something even on their mobile phone, right? Because you can trade eToro, you know, in your coffee break. And people do, right?
Well, the question is whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I understand. Yeah, I get your point.
But as long as you have this structural push into equities, to some extent just because we all expect that there is some inflation and therefore what are you going to buy? You know, housing is expensive and it's now becoming not accessible for a vast part of the population because of the down payment. So these people go actually into equities because it's perceived to be the right asset. Fixed income is not perceived to be the right asset yet. So this is exactly what I mean by saying in this new business model structure, you can have asset prices that have valuation that don't make sense and they continue to gain for a long period of time because it's now about how you allocate your assets more than how you manage your debt.